Hey, everybody out there in YouTube land, this is Mahadeva the Thunder Wizard, aka Michael William Denney. So, look, um, right now as I'm making this video, which is March 20th here in Australia, 19th, where, you know, a lot of other people live. Look, this is probably the worst time that we're going to see in this coronavirus pandemic. And so I think it's important to inject some positivity into the collective unconscious. So I'm going to talk to you about some things that may have brought about the coronavirus epidemic and astrologically what may be some signs. And I'll give you my prediction on an end date for this coronavirus pandemic. And I'll talk to you about that. And before we get into that, listen, let me just say something. You know, things depending on where you live, things may be really challenging and it might be really frightening. So I just want to inject some reality and some positivity here. But before I get into that, let me give you the prescription, the spiritual prescription for being bulletproof no matter what is going on. No matter if it's health wise, if it's financially, if it's politically, if it's no matter what is going on around you, no matter where you are, whether you're going through a recession or there's a political thing or threats of war or a pandemic, these things cannot touch you if you are following the integrity of your soul. And the reason for that is that from a spiritual perspective, you are not an accident. You didn't just, sprout out of the ground and, you're just this open to being destroyed randomly by chance. That doesn't make any sense. That's not the universe that you live in. Nothing happens by chance. You have not come into being by chance. Everybody who is a human being has come into existence because your soul has been deemed worthy for the human experiment. And that means that the powers that be, you want to call it God, you want to call it the universe, you want to call it spirit, you want to call it fate, I don't care what word you use, that this force needs for you to finish out your karmic destiny. And everybody comes here with a specific, amount of time in this world. And, if you are destined to live 100 years and you're only 30 years old, doesn't matter wars, pandemics, nothing's going to be able to stop you from following your true path. If you know what your path is and you're following it. So before I get into this, people have been asking me, Mahadeva, can you give me something to protect me from this pandemic, from the coronavirus? And, so I started thinking about, what is it that I have in my repertoire of teachings that I can create a health package. And I started putting together a health package. And when I finished it, I already have that. It's something that I've just recently introduced called the Immortality Package. So go to immortality.thunderwizard.com. I'm not saying that this is a cure for the coronavirus. Don't get me wrong. What I am saying is that these are spiritual and philosophical teachings that, in my experience, if you follow them, will guarantee that you will live out your karmic destiny on this earth with prosperity, health, happiness. There's a way to ensure that you have that in your life. And so I won't get into all of it. You can go to immortality.thunderwizard.com and look at the video there and you'll see. And if you're worried about it and you want to know practical things you can do from a spiritual perspective and a philosophical perspective to protect your health, that's the best advice I have right up there. Okay? Having said that, let me tell you that there is some astrological evidence that this pandemic is going to stop very quickly, that it will stop as quickly as it started. So I'm thinking about it. We're halfway through March, and we really didn't start hearing about it until like the middle of February. I mean, I didn't. I mean, in fact, I just went through the airport 3 weeks ago, and there was a little bit of tension about going through the airport and all that, but really it wasn't that big of a deal. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, bam! Now the whole world has shut down all of its borders. Australia has just shut down its borders. New Zealand just did. I know that the U.S. has shut down its borders to a lot. Shut down its borders to Canada. Come on, Canada is America light. That's like telling your little brother, you can't come in the house. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of paranoia going on right now, and I don't have anything against it. I think it's actually a good move for the psyche of the world. It's bad economically. A lot of people are going to be out of work and are going to lose jobs, and it's going to be really tough on economies. So I feel for that. But in terms of the psychology of the collective, this means that the whole world has said, yes, we recognize it, let's stop it, let's isolate it. And I think just that in and of itself is going to inject enough positivity and feelings of safety into the collective unconscious that will work towards this thing working itself out. So I want to talk some common sense a little later, but before I do that, let me tell you from an astrological perspective what's happening here. So as you know, at the end of 2019, there was a 6-planet traffic jam in the sign of Sagittarius, and I can't even remember all of the planets that were there. It was a while ago. I did at least 1 or 2 videos on it. And then later on, towards the beginning of this year, we had a setup in Sagittarius where Ketu is the planet of death and is one of the indicators of disease. There was a planetary alignment there that helped to create an unhealthy atmosphere. You have Rahu, which is the north node of the moon. Ketu is the south node. Directly opposite that in Gemini, and Gemini has to do with the lungs. And so you have all this negativity down in Sagittarius looking straight up at Rahu, who represents viruses and in the lungs. And what you heard about this is that people dying of pneumonia. So the reality is that most people don't get pneumonia. At best, they get a little bit of a, and that's it. So again, let me just put it in there. We were hearing about the most, the eldest and the most immune deficient people getting not all that bad virus, and because of their state of health, and they had, let's again, I guess we'll get the common sense in here. Look, a lot of the people who ended up dying were people that already had illnesses. They had already had, chronic coughs. They already were very old. They already had like heart disease and lung disease, and they had other infections like bacterial infections. So you had people who were already, their immune system was already just trudging as hard as it could to help them out, and then they get smacked with basically a really nasty flu, and that'll kill anybody in those situations. So that's all we heard, and we didn't know what this thing was. We knew it was a new virus and that there was a bunch of old people dying and some people getting sick and getting pneumonia. But we didn't hear about all of the people in the beginning who must have got it and didn't get symptoms, or went on and just went back to work and they had a little cough and they were tired and taking aspirin and they didn't even know they had it. We didn't hear about those people. We only heard about the deaths. That's what happens when a new disease comes in and you identify a new disease. You only see it in the worst cases. You don't see it in the all the people that it doesn't bother. So now we know. Now we know that that's what it is. It's not a flu virus. It's its own little thing. And it's not nothing. We definitely don't want this thing flying around because it does end up being really bad for people, and it can kill people that otherwise wouldn't die. But for the average person, we're talking at least 80% of the population. It's a and a little bit of a headache, and you feel, I mean, look at Tom Hanks and his wife. I mean, they're just not feeling so good for a few days. All right, so it's not like it's a death sentence. It's not the plague. It's not killing half of the population of Europe like the plague did. Okay, so let's understand that and let's relax a little bit. And if everybody could please stop taking all of the toilet paper. I still don't understand why that is the thing you have to take. Why? Seriously, why? I can understand people, if people went in and bought all the bottled water, I would get that, because if you're going to be holed up, what you want is you want water, right? That's like one of the main things. But they're not taking all the water, they're taking all the toilet paper. Anyway, so now what's going to be happening is that starting in April, the beginning of April, we're going to see some planetary shifts of planets moving from Sagittarius into Capricorn. And Saturn and Ketu in Sagittarius, that was one, I talked about that. That's one you got to be careful of, because Saturn is karma and Ketu is, literally death. And so it's like some negative karma had to get paid off there. And then Jupiter was smashed in between those two. And so Jupiter is good luck, it's spirituality, and it was in this, the center of the universe, like the black hole of the universe, which is the most spiritual place. So Jupiter flipped around and I believe at some point went retrograde during all this. And so we had like all of this intense karmic spiritual stuff that had to get paid off. And then directly opposite, you had Rahu, the representation of viruses, in the sign of the lungs. And so what did we see first off? The first thing I heard was, you get this thing and you die of pneumonia. That's what I heard. And of course we find out that's just not the case. It's not the case for at least 85% of the people. That doesn't happen. But things lined up just perfectly. We had a bunch of really old people getting sick and dying of pneumonia, and so there was some karmic stuff that had to get paid off, and so that's why we saw that. Of course, hindsight is 2020. We're looking back on it with hindsight. So now that we've gotten to this, and we're still, let me see exactly what's happening right now. I'm looking ahead at the end here. What's happening right now is we still have Ketu and Jupiter and Mars in Sagittarius. And so now things are, Jupiter is not retrograde and Mars is a fighter. And so now we've got Jupiter and Mars and Ketu, because all of these are fiery planets in a fiery sign. And so now we're seeing the fire, which is like the fever, what does a fever do? It burns your body gets a fever to fight the infection. So now we're fighting it. But what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is that these planets are going to move from Sagittarius to Capricorn. And Capricorn is the sign of hard work and paying off karmic debts. And so we're going to have all of these, we're going to have some positive planets in there, because we're going to have Moon in there, and we're going to have Jupiter in there, and Mars is a friend of both Moon and Jupiter, and we get all these three together, and they work towards health and healing and fighting evil and things like that. And then combined with Saturn. Now Saturn is the planet of karma, and before Saturn was in this really intense placement in this intense nakshatra about paying off spiritual karmic debts. It was a really intense scenario. If you remember, I mean, I went through a bunch of really intense stuff. And now Saturn is in his own house of working through things, working through hard things, and combined with the warrior and the priest and the healer, which is Moon. And so I've projected, because I keep hearing April 15th. I've listened to other astrologers and they say the beginning of April, things are going to start shifting, and then by April 15th, it's going to be over. Maybe, we'll see. Let's hope so. But I'm injecting some positivity there. The reason why I'm saying this is because, here in Australia, the media is just as sensational everywhere else. And the media is, how do they get away with this? I don't know. But, the news stations are saying that the borders are going to be shut down for 6 months. Now that, for me, is a little bit of a problem because I've got a visa that I have to leave the country every 3 months. And if the borders shut down when I leave, that means I can't come back in. And I'm not done with my vacation. I wouldn't be able to leave for a week and come back. So that's hard for me, but it's really hard for the people who live here, because to have the borders shut down and to have venues shut down and sporting events and things like that for 6 months, it'll just cripple the economy here. And I've already talked to people here who've seen people losing their jobs, and people are really worried. And this doesn't help the immune system. So I want to inject some positivity here, and let's start looking forward to things. And, it's good the shutdown, as I may have said already, I think the shutdown, shutdown of borders and staying at home and self-isolating is a good move for the psyche for a short period of time. For a short period of time, it's good for the psyche because it makes us feel like I'm doing everything possible and I'm sacrificing everything possible to kill this thing. And I think that is a good sign. You're fighting, you're not just sitting there a victim waiting to get tackled by some virus. You're doing something to fight back against it. And those are very extreme measures. I mean, for a country, that, like this one, that, it gets a lot of its income from tourism, to shut down its borders completely to everybody, that's a big deal. And same New Zealand across the way. They're just a tiny little island chain, and for them to shut down their that's a big deal. It's a huge loss of income and jobs and money. So for the short period, I think it's good for the psyche, and I think that people won't be able to tolerate it. I think in a couple weeks, it's just going to become intolerable. And I think that politicians, at least, speak probably in all other places. I don't know what the U.S. is going to be like. But here, the way it feels here, I mean, the economy won't be able to tolerate it, and people won't be able to tolerate it. And they'll finally, I think, if for nothing else, from a political perspective, the government will have to reopen the borders again just to keep people from, revolting. But I think the other thing that's going to happen is that we're going to see all of this positive energy come into Capricorn and bring some healing. So I projected, since people are saying, some astrologers are saying April 15th. I went all the way to April 16th, and I looked at Beijing, China, because China is where it started. So let's take a look from China's perspective, who has been hit the worst, and I believe will have been hit the worst, even though it's been hitting other places pretty hard. What do we got here? So we've got Cancer in the ascendant, which is good because Cancer is a sign of healing. It's the sign of nurturing and growth and maternal, sign of the moon. Now the moon is directly opposite it in the 7th house. So that means the moon is shining directly on the 1st house in this chart, which is the self, is the body. So that's good. It means healing. Saturn is sitting there in his own house in the 7th house. The 7th house is the house of people, by the way, the masses. When you're talking about the people in general, it's the 7th house. So we've got all of these healing planets in the 7th house, which means the population. So we've got Moon, we've got Saturn working off the karma, because Saturn's happy, he's in his own sign, he's working off karma. And Mars is there in the sign of Capricorn. Mars works hard. So we've got Mars bringing health and vitality. Mars is really important for physical health. And we've got Jupiter in there. And Jupiter is also working. When you've got Mars, Jupiter, and Moon together, you've got an extremely healthy combination of planets. And they're all working their tails off. And Saturn isn't fighting them as hard because Saturn is in his own house, cleaning things up and building stuff and doing his job. And all of this positive energy is focused directly on the ascendant, which is the moon. So it's, it means that the epicenter of where all this happened, which is China, is now going to be in this place of real healing and growth. So since China was the epicenter of where it all started, and it's because of that that everybody shut down their borders, and even President Grab the Crotch is calling it the Chinese virus. So there's just all that stuff is coming on China to make it feel bad and look bad, and now China's going to be going through some health. Since China was the epicenter of where it all happened, if China starts feeling happy again and is healthy, and there aren't, any more cases, and they've contained it, the rest of the world is going to sigh a big sigh of relief. And and if that's in the worst place, it's getting better there, it means it's going to have been getting better in the rest of the world, especially with everybody being locked down. The way I hear it, people are just, everybody's stuck at home in Italy and in the UK. And I heard Arnold talking about everybody staying at home, so I'm assuming it's the same in Los Angeles and New York and stuff like that. So we're going to get a handle on it. We're going to be okay. And remember, it's not a death sentence. It's an inconvenient, unhappy virus that in rare, extreme instances can do the same thing any, inconvenient disease like the flu. The flu kills people every year. The same people who die from the flu are the people who are dying from this. I'm not saying that, it's exactly the same. I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm just trying to give you some reality here. It's not that big of a deal. It doesn't have to be. It's great that we've all come together as a world. One of the other good things is that the whole world has come together and said, let us shut this down. Let us put our commerce, our jobs, our international egos aside, and let's just all come together and shut this down. And it's a great time to focus inward. So the whole world is focusing inward. That is a good thing. Somebody sent something on Facebook which showed a satellite photo of Italy, and it showed that since the shutdown in Italy, everybody's staying home and not going out, that pollution basically has disappeared over Italy. So this can be a time of real going inward, which is exactly what wanted to happen when all of these planets were lined up in Sagittarius, a very spiritual sign, but really like time to seriously take a look at yourself. You got to pay off some karma deep inside. And so this is the after effect, and here's been my experience with astrology. Astrology is like the seasons, a season may start on such and such date, but the full impact of the season doesn't show up until later. It kind of bounces in and out, and then like winter doesn't start at the beginning or the middle of October. I mean, you really feel winter come in hard at the end of December and in January. That's when it shows up. So same thing here. We've the planets lined up at the end of last year and said, boom, you got to go inward and you got to pay off a lot of karmic debts. And I personally went through it. I walked straight into some serious painful delusion that was kind of like a spiritual surgery in a really uncomfortable way that went in and just pulled out a bunch of old childhood garbage, that just pulled it out and brought it to my conscious awareness. And I'm sure that happened to everybody. And now what's happening after all of that is that the world is going inward and is looking at itself. We're not going to stay here for long. A couple more weeks, and you'll see things are going to switch. And I think by by the middle of April, I think we're going to be pretty much back to normal. Could be wrong, but at the very least, I'm going to inject that positivity into the collective unconscious. And again, if you want to do something practical while you're stuck at home, not going out, and you want to go inward and work with the universe to build up your energy and focus on your soul and follow your true dharma and your true path, I've created this immortality package, immortality.thunderwizard.com. All right, so that's it. If you like it, like this channel, subscribe, hit the bell button, and yeah, good health and happiness and spiritual well-being to everybody. Talk to you guys soon.